Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ted Nesi and Arlene Violet. Our guest this week is U.S. Congressman David Cicilline. Arlene.
Congressman, as you know, there are credible reports that the FBI did not share the information from the Russians relative to the two brothers in the Boston Marathon situation. New York Times also out with the story this week that the same thing happened with the New York Times Square bombing, not sharing information with the New York police officers. Is it time for the FBI director to head for the hills because he's been there too long?
I don't think so. I think that's premature. I do think that there has to be a very thorough review of all the circumstances surrounding the information we received from Russian authorities and how that information was shared or not shared. For example, I don't know whether there are thousands of such communications given in the course of a week, and so you can't sort of start tailing every one of it. If it's the first and only time it's happened in that month, then it raises a different expectation. But I think this is an issue we have to look at very carefully and determine: are there procedures that need to be changed? Are there procedures that need to be put into place that don't exist? To be sure that when we receive information like this, that it's dealt with properly.
Does your committee have some jurisdiction over that because of the foreign policy issues that you deal with? People are afraid it's going to fall through the cracks because no one's quite sure who totally has the
Foreign
oversight.
Affairs Committee.
Yeah, we do receive classified briefings on a number of these issues, particularly around the circumstances of the event and then the subsequent investigation.
And this one?
We did.
I want to move on to a local issue. Congressman, Providence must repay the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, more than $600,000 for, as they say, improperly spending taxpayer money through the Troubled Loan Program known as PEDP. During the campaign, you brushed off the PEDP stories as opposition research. But now HUD is coming after the city for $600 grand. So is HUD wrong?
No, look, I think anyone would acknowledge that when you have the opportunity to have the federal government absorb expenses of a city government, you try to be very aggressive in doing that. There were expenses that were disallowed that the director thought were appropriate. I think most of them were marketing and economic development expenses.
And limousine rides.
And we had, during those 8 years, $8 billion of new investment in the city. And so I think the director, I don't know the particulars of every thing he submitted, but I think it's not uncommon to aggressively say, no, this is an expense that is covered by HUD, and then you go through a process which HUD says yes or no. And so I think it is not surprising that there are expenses that HUD have made a determination that those are not in fact covered. But I think most cities will submit things in the hope that they're actually covered activity with a good faith argument that they are. I assume that's what happened in this case with the director, and then they made a determination that they're not. If you remember when this story first broke, they claimed that there were about double that amount. And so after review, they determined half of those were in fact coverable in reimbursable expenses, half weren't. And again, if they're not reimbursable under the rules, of course they should be reimbursed. But I think being aggressive and trying to get the federal government to cover expenses that are otherwise covered by the taxpayers is a strategy that lots of cities would follow.
Does this legitimize some of the claims that were made?
I think all of those were done in good faith. I have no reason to believe the director didn't believe that those were expenses that were actually covered by HUD regulations, and there was a dispute as to whether or not they were, and they made a determination that they weren't. But I don't.
I want to ask you about politics. Lincoln Chafee, he's an independent, but he endorsed you last year. He co-chaired President Obama's re-election campaign, and of course he praised you at the same-sex marriage bill signing last week for leading on that effort for many years. Would you consider endorsing Governor Chafee next year?
Look, I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life, and I expect that I will support the Democratic nominee for governor as I will for the other offices. And Governor Chafee's been a great friend to me and a great supporter, and that election obviously is a long way away, but it would be my expectation that I'd be supporting whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Have you talked to him about becoming a Democrat? That is swirling around.
I have not.
Has Angel Taveras or Gina Raimondo talked about their plans? You're a powerful force on the east side.
I see both the mayor and the treasurer pretty regularly. I think it's no secret that they're both looking at running for governor. They're both terrifically qualified, good candidates, and I'm sure when the time comes, we'll have a chance to talk about that.
As you know, some Secret Service members were suspended because of the caper in South America with prostitutes. This week, one of those gentlemen talked about the fact that they're being railroaded because a lot of people that have top clearances do exactly the same thing, and that ought to be looked into. Do you think there should be an investigation to see what, if any, so-called top clearance people are hiring prostitutes.
Well,
Do you regard that as a foreign policy or a
course.
national
it has
security issue?
Of course. I mean, these are individuals that are charged with the security of the President of the United States, who have top-level security clearance, and we have a right to expect them to engage in behavior beyond reproach. And if there are any serious allegations of that, they ought to be investigated and people ought to be prosecuted.
Well, again, on your committee, it would appear that this does impinge potentially on foreign policy, blackmail, et cetera. Is there any movement in your committee to look at this issue?
Again, I think the jurisdiction for Secret Service is not in the Foreign Affairs Committee.
He mentioned other top
Yeah, but there may be some
clearance people.
implication in terms of our relationship in other countries. I don't know that there's a hearing currently scheduled in the Foreign Affairs Committee, but I could imagine that this is an issue which the committee would take up.
As I hinted at, let's talk about immigration. The Senate immigration bill has a path to citizenship that takes up to 10 years for those in the country already. It requires stronger offense at the border and more border control, and has other items like more H-1B visas for high-skilled workers. What do you like about that bill? What don't you like?
I think the bill that we're seeing in the Senate is different than the bill that will come out of the House. You know, the House has had a group working in secret for about 5 years, I think, or 6 years. Republicans and Democrats have been working on this, and only in the last months, I think, acknowledged that they existed, and they've been doing a lot of good work. But I think the issues that we're going to struggle with are the following. I mean, I think there has to be a path to citizenship for the 11 million aspiring citizens who are in our country now. I think what we have to be sure is that the path is not so burdensome as to be...
Do you think the Senate one is?
Well, again, I think everyone recognizes that we have to be sure people have, behaved and don't have any criminal record, that they paid their taxes, that they pay any other penalties that are appropriate, that they go to the end of the line. But there has to be a reasonable period of time so that it's not, so that people sort of never see that possibility happening. I think the second thing that we have to pay close attention to is this triggering mechanism, this notion of we're going to implement this path to citizenship and this ability to unite families after a whole set of conditions that are met and make sure those conditions are not impossible to meet. And so this idea of making sure that we have a border security plan, I think, makes sense, but it certainly can't be the case that we can't have immigration reform until we guarantee that not a single person enters the country illegally. I mean, that's almost impossible to achieve. So I think the triggering mechanism is going to matter. The length of time, this sort of path to citizenship is going to matter. But look, I think the business community has said very clearly, it matters a lot that we remain a place that attracts the best and brightest minds. We want to be a country that, my great-grandparents came here from Italy because they wanted to build a better life for their family. That's why immigrants come to America, and we want to be a country that is inviting, and at the same time we want to be sure that we're protecting a national security interest and American citizens from danger, and so we want to balance both of those responsibilities.
On a somewhat related note, we got the new census numbers this week about who voted in last year's election, and I wrote, yes, I did, thank you. And hopefully people will look at it in PRI.com, and I was pretty stunned to see Hispanic and black turnout, this is in Rhode Island, not nationally, in Rhode Island was up 15,000 more voters than 2008, which was a huge year. The white vote was down by 51,000 voters all in Rhode Island. Put in perspective, the white share of the vote here was 97% of all the voters in 96. Now it's down to 85%. I mean, first, does this surprise you, or does this fit with what you saw? I mean, pundits, including myself, did not expect you to win as big as you did in November.
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, if you look at the changing demographics of our state and of our country, the growing participation of the Latino and African American community is not surprising. I think one of the reasons that the Republicans in the House have started to focus on immigration reform is they really realize, as a matter of political necessity, that we have got to fix our broken immigration system. And if they're seen as a group that's stopping that, that they will pay the political price for it in the next election. So I think it's a reality of sort of the changing demographics of our country.
How much does it change sort of for politicians, for people like yourself and around going forward, when you see those kind of numbers and you watch the demography? I mean, does it? How do you reflect that, I guess, over the changing constituency you have?
I mean, I think it's just being aware of the community that you represent, whether you're running for a local office, a state office, or federal office, understanding who it is that is in that state, who it is in that congressional district or that city or town, and understanding that the presence of a Latino community, African American community, that people in those communities expect people who are running for office to talk to them about issues that are important to them, to listen to their concerns, and then support public policy they care about, in the same way we have done with lots of other communities for a very long time in this country.
There seems to be some substantive deviation in the explanation of what happened in Benghazi from the Obama administration's formal statements about it versus the deputy chief testifying this past week saying he got demoted because he pointed out the inconsistencies in the explanation. Are you convinced that the Obama administration has been forthcoming on what happened there, or do you think a much deeper investigation has to commence?
I had the opportunity actually to sit through a multitude of briefings on this issue, to actually participate in hearings before the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was incredibly impressed by the work that was done by the Secretary right after that incident in ordering the Accountability Review Board by Ambassador Pickering to really go through and make a whole set of recommendations which she both embraced completely and began to implement. And I think, there's a lot of conversation about the way the incident was described, which seems to be a fascination for some folks in this. But I think there's no question that there were a set of reforms that were recommended by the Accountability Review Board that are currently being implemented. We should be sure that they're implemented. This was a horrific tragedy where we lost great American heroes. We have a responsibility to make sure that they are secure in diplomatic posts around the world. But I think a lot of what we saw just the last couple of days is attempting to politicize this horrific tragedy. And if you have any doubt about it, go on the website today, although I don't encourage you to watch it. Karl Rove's group Crossroads already has a commercial out on the web attacking Hillary for this. So I think this is a lot about trying to undermine the extraordinary work of a great Secretary of
You're on the
State.
Foreign Affairs Committee. Are you implementing and overseeing the implementation
Yes,
of
in
those
fact,
reforms?
Very
interesting.
briefly.
Yeah, we've had a hearing on it, and in fact, that's what the focus should remain on. We should continue to have hearings to make sure that those recommendations are being implemented. I predict you'll see more hearings like we saw in the Senate, where there'll be a lot of discussion about how the event was described, and a lot less focus by the Republicans in the House on what we should be focusing on, and that's the implementation of the recommendations.
My apologies, but in 30 seconds, beginning August 1st, same-sex marriage will be legal in the state, something you have supported strongly. What was May 2nd like for you?
It was great. It was great for our state. It was great to see people who have worked on this for for a very long time, and to think of people like Julie Pell, who wasn't there but spent her life working on this. To see Rhoda Perry, my former state senator, and to know the work that Speaker Fox put into this, and the governor with his early support. And it was a great day for Rhode Island. We joined the rest of New England and ensured that everyone in our state has access to full marriage equality.
Congressman David Cicilline, thank you very much for joining us this week. I want to thank you for watching. If you missed any of the program, it's online, WPRI.com. For Arlene Violet, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.